Hello and welcome to Tattered Cover virtual events. We are, for those who are unfamiliar with Tattered Cover, the largest independent bookstore in the state of Colorado. And we are really proud to keep our events going. Traditionally, we host over 500 events in person, and we have adapted while the pandemic has loomed large over our heads. But thank you to all the readers who are out there who are tuning in via YouTube to see our events. This is our 50th year being a bookstore, and we couldn't do it without readers like you. And we're one of the lucky bookstores to be expanding. If you're in the Colorado area, if you're in Denver, we have moved our downtown location closer to Coors Field where the Rockies play at a new building called McGregor Square. Be sure to check it out. Before I go any further tonight, I want to inform you that we do have closed captioning. There's a black bar at the bottom of the screen. If you hit CC, it'll make closed captioning available to anyone who wants or needs it. And then again, please check out tatteredcover.com for more virtual author events. We have another one tomorrow with Channy Kwok, who is a travel writer who has written about his experience as a journalist and traveling around the world writing. That book is called The Passenger. However, tonight I am super excited to introduce the author of The End of the World Notwithstanding, Janna L. Goodwin, who will be in conversation with Suzanne Roberts. Janna L. Goodwin is an author, playwright, director, and performer. Her work for the stage has been produced in New York and New England, Colorado, and California. She's a professor at Regis University in Denver, Colorado, where she chairs the Department of Communication and mentors developing playwrights in the Mile High MFA writing program. Her memoir, The End of the World Notwithstanding, is out now. And in conversation with her is Suzanne Roberts. She's also a travel writer, a memoirist, and a poet. Her books include the 2012 National Outdoor Book Award-winning Almost Somewhere, and also the award-winning memoir of travel essays, Bad Tourist. I am so stoked to introduce Janna and Suzanne tonight with Tattered Cover. Janna and Suzanne, please join us, and I will turn it over to you, lovely ladies.
Thanks, Adam.
Terrific. I will mute myself and turn it over to both of you. Thank you for being
Almost Somewhere, and also the award-winning memoir of travel essays, Bad Tourist.
Are you hearing that?
I am so stoked.
Yes, I'm hearing an echo.
And tonight with Tattered Cover,
I don't know why, but
join us, and I will turn it over to you, lovely ladies.
I don't hear it. I don't know where it's coming from. I think it's on my computer.
Okay,
Thanks, Adam.
Terrific. I will mute myself and turn it over to both of you. Thank you for being Almost Somewhere.
There's always something exciting.
It's still going. No, it's still going. I'm going to sign out and sign back in because I don't know what's happening here. Okay? But yeah.
Join us and
Am I just here alone?
I'm here.
Okay, hi.
I do not know. Do you still hear it now?
No, don't hear it now. It was odd and alien.
Yes, I eventually heard it. If you are still tuned into us, sorry, we're having some live stream issues. That's part of life. We will get it turned over to Janna and Suzanne soon because we are still streaming live.
She's going to log back in.
Yes.
And
well, Janna, if you don't mind, do you mind if I just start getting things going until Suzanne pops in?
yes, hopefully she'll find her way back.
Yes, yeah, and if not, we can make this happen. First, I would just love to hear about the book in your own words. I feel a lot of the time booksellers and publicists and the copy on the back of the book is not really what the writer had in mind. What is this book? What is it to you?
The book is, it turned out to be a memoir. It started off as, and I didn't realize this until I talked to Lavinia Spalding, a travel writer who and more than that, a teacher of travel writing as well, a couple of weeks ago. And she said, what about travel journals? What role have they played in your life? So more than a memoir, I think that these were excerpts from journals that I've been keeping for a really long time that started to amount to, I guess, a thematic collection of what I thought were initially going to be either white knuckle stories of adventure. Hi, Suzanne.
Hi. I don't know what was happening. It was coming in, 1 second lag the whole time for intro on my computer. So I think it was my computer.
Okay.
So
Well,
let's get started, right? Janna, have you introduced yourself since I was absent?
Adam had just jumped in valiantly and asked me kind of the genesis of the book and what it's about. So I was just responding to that. Should I finish that up?
Yes, please do.
Okay. An improvisation really is the soul of something. Wit, resilience, who knows? So the book evolved out of travel journals, and it was not a book at first. It was a show. About 4 or 5 years ago, I decided that I've been doing theater my whole life, been a playwright and an actor, and I thought there's one thing that I haven't done, which is an hour-long comedic monologue. And I haven't said this before, but it was really Mike Birbiglia's work on Sleepwalk with Me that made me think, oh my gosh, this is so great. He's got a story that's got some weight to it, and it's personal and it's hilarious. I wonder if I could do something like that, kind of as my last on stage hurrah. So I had that in mind, went down to the Grand Canyon with my husband. We were on a road trip. And down there, I got my mind blown, and I was just journaling. And when I got back, I thought, I think I've got the substance for the solo show that I want to write. And so I immediately turned around and took off and kind of went off on my own up to Wyoming just to see if I could play with some ideas. And in fact, that's where the show starts, and that's where the book started. So the show, I toured around to the United Solo Festival in New York, the Marsh Theater in San Francisco, a few venues around Denver, and then set it aside to get back to my teaching duties at Regis. And at some point decided that the stories might make short stories. So I was sending them out. I haven't done that before. I've been totally in theater. Started sending them out, and caught the attention of Traveler's Tales via the Solas Travel Awards. Thank you, Solas, and thank you, Traveler's Tales. And the rest was just, do you have more of these stories? Would you be interested in turning these into a book? And I said, yes, they're already a stage show. So I added some material, and that became the memoir, which turns out to be kind of a comedic travel memoir.
Awesome. Well, I loved the book. I blurbed it. I was honored to do so. And what I had said about it is that Goodwin spins a comedic memoir that mines the absurdity of human experience, offering readers profound moments of insight. Because of her sensibility, self-deprecating and quirky, self-aware and intelligent, I would follow her anywhere. And I'm super interested in that evolution from sort of stand-up comedy and acting to writing and sort of what the differences are and what you felt like you had to add. But I feel like we can talk about that a little bit later, because I'd love to hear you read from the book. And I'm sure everyone else would love to hear some of the stories too before we sort of talk about that.
Okay, I think maybe starting at the beginning makes sense. So since that's kind of the phrase, obviously, as is true for most books, it sets the stage for the rest of the book. So I'll go ahead and start. Chapter 1 is entitled, "You Are Reminded That Your Safety is Your Own Responsibility." And I just want to say, maybe before I read, if I could, that the stories, and I think we're going to talk about the structure of the book in a bit, but there's an overarching story. It's not just separate chapters or separate stories. There's this kind of an overarching story or an uber story. And then within that, there are a lot of stories that kind of knit back to the main story or to the themes in the main story. So this really is kind of a setup that I will arc back to by the end of the book. It is a beautiful summer day. I'm traveling alone, renting a cabin at a normally tranquil spot, that's called foreshadowing, on the banks of the Big Laramie River at the edge of the Medicine Bow National Forest up in Wyoming. You will not stumble upon Woods Landing on your way to someplace else, because that's not where it is. And you have never been here on purpose. We'll have to rely upon my capacity to draw you into the setting using the magic of language. Imagine a vale of cottonwood, aspen, laurel, and ash, surrounded by prairie foothills and pine-covered mountainsides. My cabin is a 1-minute walk down a dirt road to a post office and a general store with a couple of gas pumps out front. The store sells regular worms, Folgers, batteries, Butterfinger bars, and bigger worms. Across the way is a cafe, saloon, dance hall that was erected according to the informative cover of the laminated cafe menu in the 1930s by a Norwegian named Håkon Lestrom. The logs all hand cut, perfectly fitted to cleave together without nails. The floor supported by 24 boxcar springs. When the locals come here to dance, which apparently they still do on weekends, they rebound quite a bit off that bouncy floor, which I would very much like to see. Besides that, I am up here. Why? First of all, I don't need a reason. I was born and grew up in Wyoming, and they have to let me back in whenever I want. Second, I'm on a self-styled writing retreat. My husband, Michael, and I just returned home from a visit to the Grand Canyon that was mind-blowing and life-changing. As soon as we hit Denver and cleared out the car, I turned around and said, look, I have to go off again someplace on my own to think about eons and overwhelming forces and how insignificant I am. Don't watch any Sandra Bullock movies without me. I love you. Goodbye. I am checked in before noon. I unpack and install myself, t-shirts in the dresser, 6-pack in the mini fridge, cans, I'm not fancy, ukulele on the sofa, bug spray on the counter, Beyond Good and Evil on the bedside table, fishing rod by the door, and in my pack are the following essentials: water, compass, gorp, and a first aid kit, Neosporin, a Q-tip, and a Band-Aid. What I lack in skill, I make up for in provisions and medical supplies. I scoot a chair to where I can watch the river roll by as I porch sit, write, and read Nietzsche, and then wander over to the cafe for a bite to eat before I settle in for the week. So why am I, a couple of hours later, standing on the porch of my cabin, totally repacked, my Fiat 500, henceforth referred to as Vern, waiting at the ready? Vern does not literally pant, but if any car could, it would be she, they, he. It's complicated. See, when he was brand new and my friend Cynthia Kolanowski first laid eyes upon his sea foam green adorability, she cried out as if encountering an old classmate, Vern, a name spontaneously and honorably bestowed, but which for some reason I saw in my mind as having a silent feminine E at the end. It never occurred to me that Vern might not be the car's name, and that does not occur to me now. But since the christening, there has ensued no small amount of auto-gender confusion on my part. When I'm driving Vern, he's a he. I can tell, I know it on the inside. When I introduce her, I'd like you to meet my car, Vern, Vern, Jeremy, Jeremy, Vern, she is a she. Yes, I do profess to my undergraduates that gender identity is socially constructed, fluid, and a performance. I am not saying I don't want any trans in my car. I do, mission and portation. I just don't want to be futzing around looking for the right pronouns. So while I am not going to run out and install a gun rack or a trailer hitch to make it clear, my mind is made up. He's a he. He will be raised as a he, driven as a he, and when that day comes, sold as a he. Cute little effeminate Italian he. I digress. Which, according to our resident philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, is a sign of health. All that is unconditional being pathological. I am about as conditional as a person can be, which is why I am standing here dithering on the front porch of my cabin. Should I stay or should I go? Middle of the afternoon, scanning the sky with a look of consternation on my face. Consternation is appropriate. The air is hazy. There are helicopters and small planes buzzing around overhead. An atmosphere of, let's call it, urgency has rapidly developed as described in the following account. And I'll just read one more paragraph. After lunch, I went over to the general store to get me some dessert. While I was there, 3 Albany County Sheriff's Department cars came racing into the parking area and skirched to a halt, spraying gravel and raising a cloud of dirt. A development that, in the context of my having recently read the cafe menu front to back for entertainment, was spectacularly exciting. I hung around to see what might happen next, unwrapped my Butterfinger, took a bite, watching. Deputies were here with the news that rapidly approaching from over the foothills across the road, quite visible from where I stood, was an impressive column of smoke. I'll stop there.
Oh my God, you're a great reader. I love the beginning of that book, and I can so tell that you're a performer and comedian because the way you read that is just wonderful. But I was sort of struck as you were reading about the idea of how the book really starts with writing the book, right? So in that way, it's a meta book. It's a book about writing a book, and I wondered if, and maybe this is just self-serving because I'm actually writing a book that's similar to that right now, and I want to hear a little bit about that. I want to hear a little bit about how that came to be, how that self-awareness worked into the writing of it, and anything else you have to say about that. I'm super interested.
I'd like to hear about yours too, because I think it's almost dangerous to do that because it's so self-reflexive that it can go wrong unless you really have control of the voice. So fortunately, I wasn't thinking about that when I started. I actually got up to Woods Landing, pulled out my moleskin journal, and started writing about. I already had written about Grand Canyon, and I started trying to pull that together as the fire started. And then of course the whole journal just became about this, like, should I stay? Should I go? And I ended up going into Laramie. I ended up coming back out to Woods Landing. The fire kept going. I didn't know what to do. And so all of that became a story that I was just as interested in following as I was in writing about, meaning in Grand Canyon, which is where I started. And there is where I think I found the comedy. And I said, well, I want to write a comedy. I want to be standing up, making people laugh, hopefully, or at least have a philosophy wrapped in some laughter. And so from there, it actually, I didn't write itself, but I will say that first chapter did, in a way. It just spun itself out in the journal, and I didn't even change that much. When I stood it up on its feet, my director and I just kind of worked through it and made sure that you could follow it. And I guess that then set the tone for the rest of the stories that followed, because they all kind of chained out from that story. The way that a great conversation, when people are all excited and everybody, your story reminds me of my story, and that reminds me of this other similar story, and you get way over here and then you bring it back. It kind of just happened from that seed of Grand Canyon meets catastrophe in Medicine Bow National Forest.
Yeah, I loved it. And I'm also struck by the way that you balance sort of the external threats that are real, right? Or the places, the external places, like whether it's the catacombs, right? Or the fire, or the storm, right? When you're with your parents. And I wonder how you balance, because so much of the book is also like disasters of your own making, which again is something you and I have in common, because most of my fears and things come from my own imagination. Even if I'm escaping some mudslide or something, it's mostly my own internal voice that's scaring me the most. So I'm just wondering, how do you think about that? How do you think about sort of the balance between the real threats and also the sort of internal craziness, right, that makes us scared?
Can I just jump back and say that was from this book, Bad Tourist, and the mudslide chapter reminded me so much of my tornado story, except that I felt like you were in way more danger than I was. So for readers who have not yet read Bad Tourist, first of all, you must, and second of all, there is a similarity in that Suzanne is escaping from what seems like the world is crumbling and falling down the mountains, and you can't tell where it's going to come from or whether it's going to. Okay, so what's different to me is you were in that situation and people were running around you trying to escape. I was in Kansas in a car with my parents, and nobody was concerned about the tornado but me. So even though I did feel a resonance where we were both playing out the worst case scenario, I feel like my imagination goes very big, very quickly, and ties in with my entire system, as I will say yours did too in that case, but I'll leave that to the reader. But it ties into my whole system, and I become almost a different person because my imagination has played out the death scenario, the chaos, the potential loss of my parents who are driving the car towards the tornado. And that really is, I don't know if it's characterological. I don't know if I have become this way because everybody else in my family is so pragmatic and phlegmatic that I've taken on all of the anxiety. I don't know if it's the curse of being a writer or somebody with a big imagination, which I'd love to hear your thoughts on. But I think it is a constant managing of the dramas that go on in our head and the things that are actually dangerous and happening outside of us. And the book definitely plays with that because it's a liminal space. It's hard sometimes to know. People are always telling you, trust your gut, follow your instincts. Well, my instincts tell me that I'm about to die a lot of the time when I'm not. And then they don't tell me that I'm in danger when I am. And so please, can I toss that back to you and get your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny, as you're talking, I'm thinking, well, in the mudslide chapter, we definitely were in danger, but I wasn't in any danger on, the airplane during turbulence, right? So I do that too. So I know exactly what you mean. And I do think being writers, we have these giant imaginations that sometimes serve us, sometimes don't. And I don't know if we sort of pick up the slack in that because everyone around us is, calm. I mean, my husband, as I call him in the book, practical boyfriend and practical husband, because you know how many times he said to me, "You're fine," right? Because we're fine, but I'm not fine. And so I do think that some, that neuroses or whatever it is common among storytellers, and or maybe it's just something that you and I have in common, or maybe it's just, something we have in common as travel writers, right? Or maybe as women travel writers.
Or as a poet, because I have another friend whose name I will not mention here, but she's a poet and she does exactly the same thing as well. There's a playing out of multiple possibilities and things that could happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I think it's, I think it's interesting. And I, in fact, thought it made your book really interesting and relatable. And I loved that character. And, and I think that when I write, I think, I think that there is the narrator and there's me writing it. And I think my narrator is a little bit more nervous than maybe I was, right? And again, if we are trying to write humor, right, that sort of exaggeration, even if it's just slight, might serve the work. But that was another thing I wanted to ask you about is your use of humor, which I'm really interested in. I think that especially as women, it's harder to pull off humor because things maybe that we write don't seem funny, that if a guy wrote it would seem funny. I mean, it's like from the time where little girls are told not to tell fart jokes, but when little boys do, everyone laughs, right? So there's this sort of gendered thing that's happened. And so I've run up against critics who have said that my humor is unseemly. They never say that about a guy. So I just want to hear sort of what you think. And, even in that first little bit, I thought was very, very funny. Your sort of understatement with the, even the exaggeration, right? With the Q-tip and the Neosporin is my medical kit, right? There's just so much funny in that. And so I just wanted to hear kind of how you approach humor, especially from a comedy background.
Well, one answer to that, I think, is that like you, and you say this, and again, I'm referring back to your book because I just recently finished it, but you have a chapter in which you talk about your familial humor and how important humor has been in your family, especially during hard times. I feel like one thing is, in my family, humor is very much appreciated. We would rather laugh together than anything else. So some families communicate by yelling. Some families communicate, they're very quiet. Our family likes to sing and to laugh together and to make each other laugh. And I feel really fortunate because of that, but I also know that shaped my desire to make people laugh. But also there's this good-naturedness that runs through both my mother's Norwegian Danish side of the family and my father's kind of Kansas farm family. And my father himself is extremely good-natured about everything, including life and death. There's always a way to step back and frame it. as in some way, as, you know, that's life. My dad wrote a little book called Poof, which was just about dying and what to do with all of your affairs. But he says, when you poof, so the family thing, and I think that culture, that familial culture, has made me attentive to that. And also, I guess that's how I experience connection to other people a lot of the time, is either making people laugh or sharing that humor. So it's become important to me, as I think it probably is for you as well. The gender thing, I don't know. I did improv for many, many years, and I always found that on stage, in improvisation, I was instantly turned into a girlfriend, a wife, a nag, some cliched female characters, so that I could be quickly dispensed with in improvs when I was on stage with guys. And it could have just been that I wasn't that great of an improvisationalist, but I started noticing way back in my 20s, when I noticed that dynamic, it was almost like I wasn't allowed to be as funny or to be a funny character. I was introduced down at the Comedy Store in Denver once as Janna Goodwin. She's brand new at comedy, and she's really gonna try her best. And they introduced every other guy as like up and coming comic. And I got introduced with this little pat on the head and like, let's root for the little lady. So I think there's something to whether we're allowed to be funny or not.
I think so too. And in fact, I've read some of the most interesting thing I've read from people who have transitioned. Like, I read something, and I wish I could remember the author. It was a woman who had transitioned to become a man, and he wrote this essay about how everything, all his jokes that he used to use as a woman, were now funny. Like, that nobody laughed, right, when he was a woman, but now that he's a man, it was like all of a sudden everything's funny. And I just thought, yeah, and what is that about? I mean, is it just that, you know, sort of those gender constructs that tell us like we should be more quiet or more little or more not in our bodies or not talking about our bodies, right? You know, I mean, a lot of my humor is bodily humor, right? Things women really are not supposed to be talking about, like pooping and throwing up and, you know, sex and all that, the messy stuff. And so I've been thinking a lot about that, you know, but I really appreciate your humor. I think it's definitely a little, it's not as bodily, but it's this sort of lovely, dry humor that I just love. And it's interesting that your dad said poof off. My mother, when she talked about death, she said pop off.
Oh, pop off, right. You say that in the book. Yes, and my dad was poof, when you poof.
When you poof, yeah. So yeah, there's another similarity.
And it's not just humor in the family, is it? It's humor specifically in response to mortality and response to like heavy things.
Yeah. Yeah. When my mother like was on her deathbed, she started laughing. And I said, what? And she said, oh, it's just that if I'm just thinking, what if I pop off and I'm not really popped off and you think I'm popped off and you bury me alive? And she's laughing about it. And I said, well, we're going to cremate you, so you don't have to worry about that. And she said, oh, okay.
Oh, phew. Close call there.
Although, yeah, you know, she had it in her mind somehow that, you know, that she was going to be put away before her time. So, but it was funny to her. So
yeah, and I think that helps. I mean, the only thing, you know, I realize we can't laugh about everything, and not everything is funny. Plenty of things are not. So I guess that the underlying philosophy is when you can, if you can,
right,
find a comedic take or see the absurd or laugh together in some way with somebody. I think it's useful. I think it's not always right. It's not always appropriate. It's not always healthy or possible. When it is.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. So I would love, I mean, I don't know if you're open to this, but I think we have another like 25, 30 minutes, and I would love to hear you read another little something if you have something prepared.
I've got a couple more possibilities. Why don't I
love
read?
That.
Let me see if I can, got so many things on my screen here. I thought maybe the tornado story, since I talked about that. So let's see, this is from chapter 5, which is called Then They Come Toward You, in which my elderly parents and I take a road trip across Nebraska, Kansas, and back home to Colorado. And on the last leg of the trip, things happen. Excuse me. Hydration is so important in these settings. In this scene that I'm going to read, I've been watching this distant cloud form and become a black shelf. And the highway just takes us closer and closer to it. And so I've cut a couple of lines in this reading because they refer to something elsewhere in the book. So this is not verbatim. What I am saying is that after more than half a century of knowing me, my parents, by the time we are on our way back from Kansas, are used to my lively interpretations of everyday phenomena. They just start humming or turn up the radio real loud. But then, I kid you not, a thin, twisty finger does stretch out from the sky to the ground. Imagine my excitement. I have my iPhone ready, which is why the heart-pounding drama that follows was recorded for posterity. I don't come across too well in the video, but I'm sharing it with you because I told you so. What you can see in the distance, thrillingly shot by me from the backseat of the car looking out through the front windshield, is the descending funnel. What you could hear, unfortunately for me, is the conversation. The scene begins as I turn the camera on, catching my own self mid-outcry, me. Because we're heading into a tornado, and I'm actually going to do this the way that it sounds on the video. Because we're heading into a tornado that is going to go down to the ground, and here we sit. It's going down to the ground. My parents barely respond. My mother driving calmly and relentlessly onward. My father almost certainly enjoying the flashes of lightning. Go back, I urge. Jesus, you guys, go the other direction. A pickup truck ahead of us can be seen pulling over to the side of the road. Me, when people pull over, it's going to the ground. It's going to the ground. Dad, unperturbed, as if describing a cloud in somebody else's life or in a novel. We're not going anywhere near it. It's about 6 miles to the north. Me, and then they come toward you. So a side note, I realized later that this impression of tornadic behavior came from my viewings of watching The Wizard of Oz when I was a little kid. And you know where it comes right at the camera. And I just thought, that's what they do. They see you and they head at you. Rain is hammering down. The wind picks up as we pull into Otis, population 500, 7 blocks long. The town's tornado siren goes off. We come to a stop sign where I lose the rest of my composure, which was not much to begin with. I roll down the window of the Avalon and to a fellow wearing a Jayhawks t-shirt, sitting serenely on his front porch, appeal loudly, "Do you have a basement?" Other than staring, he's unresponsive, which I take to be a no. I feel I ought to wish him well, however, so as Mom accelerates, I shout, "Good luck then, God willing, may we all live to see another day." Rounding the corner, we pass a church, no fortress, but sturdy looking, and with a cry of "Stop!" I leap from the car to assault its front door with my fists, wailing, as much as I hate to admit it now, quote, "What is the point of a locked church?" My parents are now scrunched down in the front seat, far more discomfited than frightened. Dad's hand is over his face, and he's shaking his head. I am utterly beside myself. I insist that we must find shelter immediately. Giving in at last to my hysteria, Mom pulls into a parking space next to a modest eatery. She and Dad start to slowly, nay reluctantly, unbuckle themselves, as if we are the first bashful guests to arrive at a soiree. I don't even wait to help them from the car. They're in their late 70s, not frail, but slight. Each weighs less than a pumpkin. The wind is howling around us, blowing every way. The car doors flapping out of control. And my attitude is more or less, you guys are on your own. I'll stop it.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it so much. So how does your family feel about these stories that you tell, with the ones that they appear in? And what do they think about the book?
You know, it's funny. My mom's only comment so far, I swear to God, her only comment so far was, "I had no idea you were so jumpy." So I don't know. But then again, you know, she's a very contained, contained person. But I think she enjoyed the stories. And my dad my dad's also a reader, so his response to this tends to be to tell me about all the books that he's read that my book reminds him of. But he's also shared the book with people, so I think he likes it, and I don't think that anybody has objections to the ways that they're depicted in the book, which are universally affectionate. I think that was my guideline. And again, I'd like to talk to you about this, because we both include family members and people that we're close to in our writing, as memoirists do, and autobiographical writers, etc. But I feel like if you're telling a story and you're affectionate and you feel like, if this person would object to it, I would remove it. And then, I did check in with people as well. If I was going to write about a friend or use a real name, I made sure to check in with the friend and say, I've got your name in the book, I'm using it, may I? So in the end, I felt like, yes, there's a line to tread between overreaching, but I haven't heard from anybody in my family, including my brother Mitch, or anybody else that I wrote anything that they disapproved of. What about you? How did you manage that line? Just to.
Wow. Obviously not everybody in my book I've written about affectionately, right? So some people I'm no longer in touch with, so I just changed their name and moved on and didn't worry too much about it. But I'm always surprised, because the people that I think I've portrayed really well will say, well, wait a minute, and they don't think something went down exactly the same way. And I always do check in with people who are still in my life. But I did lose some family over Bad Tourist, which makes me very sad. And I was very surprised, actually. And it wasn't necessarily the way that I talked about the family, but it was the way I talked about my mother's parents, my grandparents, who were abusive. And I didn't think that my mother's character would make sense unless I included some of those things. And my mother wanted me to include those things. My mother read the book and fully approved of it. But I have some family that's really angry with me still. So that is a real upshot of writing memoir and creative nonfiction. But I'm really careful. I make sure it's my story. And my mother's mother is my story to tell, whether my cousin or my aunt like it or not. So I do think it's something that I think writers always worry about, and maybe worry about too much, because the people that I have worried about didn't care at all. And then the people that I would have never dreamed were angry. So I just don't think you can predict it.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And there are a couple of people who appear in the book under different names, and I haven't heard from them. And I don't know. I mean, sometimes you just don't know. Did I step on somebody's toes? Did I tell the story the wrong way? But I agree with you. It's our story to tell. And as long as we're not out, to do evil to others, or to try to tell their stories, I guess. But I think it's a really interesting line to tread. Isn't that what the book You Can't Go Home Again was kind of about? This is an old book, but it seems like it was about an author who, and he writes fiction, I think, about his hometown. Yeah. And then finds that it wasn't as fictional to the characters as he thought.
Oh yeah, I know people have gotten in trouble for fiction too. So it's not just, writing memoir or essays. So I guess I'll have one more question, and then I want to open it up to, anyone who's watching the live stream who might have questions. But I'm always interested in what you're reading right now, and what other travel writers, or people who would like to be, travel writers, do you have any recommendations for books that you've loved?
Yeah, well, what I'm reading right now is, I actually just finished your Bad Tourist. And before that, and I've been reading the people who I've been talking to in the context of this book. So I read Pam Mandel's Same River Twice. I read Lavinia. I'm reading Lavinia Spalding's Writing Away. Let's see. I'll tell you who I recommend. I don't know if you are familiar with Isabella Bird. Are you? You must be. I think it's A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains. And I just stumbled across this book when I was researching a novel that I was working on. And I just fell in love with it. There's this intrepid journalist back in the late 1800s, this British woman who just takes off and goes wherever she wants to go and stays with whoever she meets along the way. And this book is just kind of about how she comes out west and gets on a horse and rides in the winter all over the Rocky Mountains. It's fascinating. It's a great read. I love Isaac Denison, Karen Blixen's Out of Africa. And I realize that there's probably all kinds of problematic things about that book now. I don't know how it has aged given the discourse today. But I loved it when I first read it. Cheryl Strayed's Wild, I loved. So, and then I consider Ayaan Hirsi Ali's book Infidel to be, in a strange way, a very powerful travel memoir by a woman. So, well, how about you? What are your influences? Are you willing to share back?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, as far as influences, I was a biology major when I was an undergrad. So I read a lot of the nature canon, and a lot of it was the male writers, right? So I read, John Muir and Henry David Thoreau and Aldo Leopold and, sort of all those guys. But, my senior year in college, I read Pam Houston's Cowboys Are My Weakness. And it really gave me permission to use my own voice, because I always wanted to write, but I just, I didn't think I really had stories to tell. But when I saw that she was writing about, nature and the outdoors and the wilderness and her dogs and her, mistakes with men, I thought, oh my gosh, that's what I write about, right? And so she really gave me permission to write. And like you, I like some of the nature books that might not be considered like in the nature or not nature, but the travel books that might not be considered in the travel canon so much. Like I love Ellen Malloy, and she's a nature writer, but also travel, right, in Anthropology of Turquoise. And I loved Camille Dungy's Guidebook to Relative Strangers, which is about a Black woman traveling through the United States with her young daughter and sort of the interaction she has traveling with a little girl. And there's also actually a chapter in there about traveling back to Africa. And Carolyn Forche's What You Have Heard Is True. Again, you wouldn't call it a travel book so much as, it's a book about war. It's a book about going to Salvador, when she was a young woman at the dawn of Civil War. But it's very much place-based and about travel. So I love those books, But so do we have any questions from the audience or people?
Yeah, there's a few questions. Sorry for just hopping on. I do want to say, what I love about travel writing is it's never just about travel, right? It's
Right.
It's about Janna. You can find yourself. You can learn about culture, but it's always there's something just so specific that just it's like, oh, I did not expect that from this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have a few questions. One is, and you both touched upon this a little bit, but when writing nonfiction about your life, what is the policy of writing about others? Do you have to change names? Or is it courteous? What's the actual rules is a question.
I don't know that there are any actual rules. I mean, for me, it was feeling my way through this and checking in with people. Or changing enough about them, including their names, that they weren't recognizable. So I went either way. I either checked in with people and said, "Is it okay with you if I tell this story?" or use your name, or both. Or people who I wrote about who might recognize themselves anyway, but I changed enough that they wouldn't be recognizable. That's me. I don't know if Suzanne, if you operate by, or if there are rules, then I should know about them.
Well, my only rule for myself is, again, as I said, as long as it's my story to tell, and so my first memoir was about hiking the John Muir Trail. It's called Almost Somewhere. And in it, I had two other characters who I hiked with, Erica and Dion. And I sent them both the manuscript, asked them both if I could use their real names. And they both wrote back and said, yes, you can use my real name. I was more worried about Dion because I had written about her eating disorder, but it was part of our trip, as we're hiking together. So it was part of my story to tell. And she was totally fine with it. Erica, there were a few places that Erica said, this is not important, and this is not your story to tell. And I said, well, it's kind of like character development. But then I looked at it and I realized she was right. That a few of those things were not my story to tell, and they didn't really add anything. And I had enough other things that happened on the trip that were similar. So I cut some of those things out. Because I learned that she was right, and so I really tried to do that with Bad Tourist. And my next book will be coming out, which is another book of essays. And again, I run it by everyone. I run it by my sisters. I'm using their real names. My friend Sholay is in Bad Tourist and in Animal Bodies. I've run everything by her. My husband would have really liked me to change his name, but I didn't. So that was the only person who wanted me to change the name, and I didn't do it.
Then there's a question about when it comes to writing essays and piecing things together. Are some of these pieces that were out prior, they found their way in journals, websites, and then do you go back and edit them, or what does it physically look like putting these books together?
So yeah, mine was written as the solo show. So it really was plumbing back into my travel journals, starting with a story that then kind of chained out or pulled out other stories. After the show and before the book, I did pull these apart and send them out as separate short stories. And one of them was the tornado story was published in Defenestration, which is a comedic literary journal, online literary journal. But other than that, I would imagine that it's very different for Suzanne, who's been writing for much longer than I have.
Yeah. And then you mentioned, this is my question, so I'm sorry if I misheard. You talked about a novel next, is that correct? Or did I just mishear that completely? I wrote a novel actually was working on it even while I was pulling this from a show into a book. And then I hit the stage where it felt like I'd revised it, it was done, and hit the agenting stage, which is where novels go to die, as I understand it. And so I do have a novel that I finished that is sitting there and probably will be better now that I go back to it, that I've given it this breathing space. But I just kind of gave up on the agent piece was a puzzle that I could not solve. So I turned to this, and now I've got the novel, and I think I've got some ideas now for other stuff, but I like this essay thing. I really like. And so I might go back and do either more travel writing or more essays, and I might start working on another novel. I'm not sure. And then one last question, Janna. For someone who writes, that now you have an essay, a memoir collection out, you write for the stage, you have that novel out. Are you able to write all those on the same day, or do you have to be like, today is nonfiction, tomorrow is the stage? Like, how is your writing like for that?
I have to get totally immersed into one project at a time. I sink into it, and that's all I can even think about. In fact, it's hard for me to even write during the school year because I've got all the, the chair responsibilities or the teaching responsibilities, and it's hard for me to even focus. So summertime is my writing time. Writing retreats are amazing when you can go on those. But I can't work on more than one project at once. Can you? Adam, can you?
I mean, so I don't, normally my writing is writing about writers. So it's whatever comes to me. If I try to write fiction, which I haven't done in a while, it has to be when I'm on vacation almost. I can't even do it in my own home. I have to be somewhere else completely.
Right. And Suzanne, you're very prolific. Can you work on more than one thing at once?
Well, I can work on, if I'm in different stages. So like I just finished editing my new book of essays, Animal Bodies, and the copy edits will be coming back to me while I'm working on this new memoir about taking care of my mom when she's dying. So I can do those as long as they're in different places. And then I can always, do stray things. Like if I get assignments, someone asks me to write an essay about teaching or something, I can do that too. And I sometimes use writing to procrastinate other writing.
Yes, writing to procrastinate other writing. I think that's like where some beautiful stuff comes out from what I could tell talking to writers.
Yeah, I wrote 2 books of poetry while I was writing my dissertation.
Beautiful. Well, Janna and Suzanne, thank you so much for joining Tattered Cover and letting us be a part of tonight. It's a really, I know it's special. We have your book out. Where can we find you, both of you, on the internet, websites, social media? Where can we find you?
I'm at Janna L Goodwin, all one string of letters, jannalgoodwin.com, and Janna L Goodwin on Facebook as well.
Yeah, I'm at SuzanneRoberts.net, and Facebook, I have a regular friend page and author page, and also on Instagram, Suzanne Roberts 28.
Perfect. Well, thank you both so much for coming. Like I said, Celebrating with Tattered Cover, The End of the World Notwithstanding is out now. You can get it at tatteredcover.com. In person, we're still standing. Thank you so much for both of you for coming on. This was such a lovely experience, and I love hearing both of you. For everyone listening, the link will be emailed to you within the next 2 days, so you could re-enjoy it and share it with all your friends and let them know how great Suzanne and, of course, Janna L. Goodwin is the lady of the hour. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry, I clicked